Shabbat Shalom. And Chag Sameach. Chag Sameach. As we were heading into this evening with, I guess really this afternoon, with torrents of rain pouring down and getting in the way of our plans to have this service in the sukkah, I found myself thinking about how many sukkahs were ruined this year before the holiday even started. Bits of schach rolling down the street and soggy paper chains on the ground. I saw a few of those in my neighborhood. Especially for those of us who spent the last days decorating, it's sad. It's really sad, even if the weather is supposed to clear up in just a couple days. It feels like it always rains at some point during this holiday. By design, Sukkot marks the transition from dry to wet, which is why we pray for rain immediately after this holiday, so that we can get to the rainy season once we've completed our tent dwelling. But it's always a roll of the dice this time of year. And given how precarious our Sukkot feel today especially, I was reminded of a famous Yiddish poem. I feel like you're probably tired of hearing Yiddish poems from me, but still, I'm going to share this one. Never. Thank you, never. A famous Yiddish poem about a sukkah by Avram Raisin, famous Yiddish socialist poet, and it's called A Sukkah Aklena. You may know it from the song. I won't actually sing it, but I'll have the first part in Yiddish and then translate the rest into English. A Sukkah Aklena mit breitelich Gemeine hab ich mir a Sukkah gemacht. Ziegedig dem Dach mit a bissel Schach, wenn ich sitz mir in Sukkah in Tracht. A little sukkah with simple boards I barely put together. I covered the roof with a little schach, and I sit in the little sukkah and think. The cold wind blows through the cracks and almost blows the candles out. Listen to this wonder. Only when I finish saying the Kiddush, then the candles blow out. With a great cry, with a bitter yell, my wife comes inside. Listen, my husband, the wind will soon blow the sukkah down. What will happen then? Don't be silly, I tell her. Don't trouble with this, and don't worry about the wind. No matter how many winds roar, no matter how many generations come, the sukkah will always remain standing. Now, I think the cadence is probably nicer in the Yiddish, and perhaps it'll be better if we sing it maybe some other time. But this sukkah standing forever is a really significant image. Sometimes a sukkah is just a sukkah, but in Raisin's description, it's clearly more than that. The sukkah in this poem is in some ways like every other, a simple structure exposed to the elements that is inherently impermanent. But in the final stanza, the man explains that this sukkah will stand forever. In poetic expression, the sukkah here is not just our famous temporary dwelling, but a binyan adei ad, an eternal edifice that lasts through the generations, no matter what winds or rains roar around it. This is actually a clever and ironic twist, and the meaning of this poem hinges on the ability of a sukkah to somehow last forever. According to halakha, as you probably know, a sukkah can only be kosher if it is temporary. And as we know, multiple times, in multiple ways, the holiday of Sukkot puts a special emphasis on ephemera. The sukkah itself, sure, is a symbol of what is ephemeral in our lives, but also the union of the four species of the lulav and etrog is inherently impermanent. The lulav and etrog are only united as long as we hold them together in our hands before separating them again. And when we read Ecclesiastes during this holiday, we remember that to everything there is a season but not an eternal lifespan. The sukkah is such a rich symbol of impermanence that it appears elsewhere in our tradition to refer to things that are fleeting and fragile. Our liturgy gives us the concept of a Sukkat Shalom, which we said earlier today, a canopy of peace, to remind us that just as wind and rain have the power to knock down a sukkah, so too can our own stubbornness or fear destroy a fragile peace. The sukkah also appears as a symbol of the impermanence of political rule. In In Birkat Hamazon, which we pray after meals, we add a special line during Sukkot. Harachaman, may the All-Merciful establish for us the fallen sukkah of David. That may not be part of your practice, but that is traditionally what Jews say during this season in Birkat Hamazon. And this reminds us that even moments of our own self-sovereignty are fleeting. And so too is any political regime under which we live, the good ones and the bad. And here we find a glimpse of what Avram Rezen was getting at in his poem, when he said that the sukkah, in Yiddish, vet ewig stehen, that the sukkah would last forever. Rabbi Judah Loew, the Maharal of Prague, taught that the beauty of a sukkah is that when the winds blow it down, we can easily pick it up. A sukkah is not really so stable as to withstand a storm, but it's also not so fragile that it is impossible to rebuild. Since impermanence goes both ways, warning us when we feel too comfortable and reminding us that things change when we feel despair, our ancestors in exile could look to the sukkah as a symbol of the possibility of changing their futures for the better. There was and is always a chance at rebuilding. This, I think, is the essence of the eternal sukkah in Rezen's poem. In the Yiddish, the word ewig, meaning eternal, conjures two images from the canon of Yiddish literature. Der ewiger Wanderer, meaning the eternal wanderer, referring to the Jews of diaspora, and der ewiger Gott, sometimes shortened merely to der ewiger, a word used frequently in women's prayers, meaning the eternal God. These words and their literary resonance suggest that the sukkah is a symbol of Jewish existence writ large. As we meander through the storms of history, we're always able to rebuild in special relationship with the divine. A people who recognizes the inherent impermanence of structures and exists in service to something non-physical. Such a people can easily rebuild and be rebuilt. The book of Ecclesiastes hints to us to be aware or beware of reliance on structure specifically. Our tradition imagines Ecclesiastes to have been written by King Solomon, who orchestrated the construction of the first temple in Jerusalem, the most important Jewish structure of all time. And at the beginning of the text, he says, Havel Havalim, vanity of vanities. He looks out at all that was built during his reign and he says, it is all vanity. People work hard to build all these structures, he acknowledges, but inevitably one generation gives way to another and everything fades. It's a pretty dramatic moment or statement of self-awareness coming from one of Judaism's greatest builders. And as we know, it foreshadows the subsequent destruction of the temple. But even knowing this didn't stop Solomon from building it. And in commenting on the limits of physical buildings, Ecclesiastes presaged the arc of Jewish history. Jews have passed through ephemeral structures in every land and in every era. Often our structures have been destroyed by others, and sometimes we've knocked them down ourselves, because that's what the moment demanded. And still, we manage to exist as a coherent civilization precisely because of this ability to rebuild and recreate ourselves in every generation. This truth about us, which Avram Rezen illustrates, applies to Reform or secular Jews as much as it does to the Satmars in Williamsburg, who, believe it or not, also sing his song or his poem. We are always recreating ourselves, reimagining Judaism to fit our most recent context. This is our genius as Jews, which allows us to keep going. Sometimes it feels like our Jewish institutions define our Judaism, but the Sukkah reminds us not to be too reliant on whatever edifice we're currently sitting in. There is something eternal about the Jews, but that everlasting spirit is not found in our institutions themselves. It's somewhere else within us, within our creative potential, and in our ability to know what a given moment demands. There is a time to tear down and a time to build. May we find the discernment in 5784 to know which time exactly we're living in. Shabbat Shalom and Chag Sameach.